Hollywood's greatest friendship was embodied in a single image for decades. Defying death with a smile, two men jumped off a cliff while laughing. However, the world remained unaware of the story behind Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid's famous event. It was a 50-year connection forged not only on film sets and through mutual renown, but also through personal struggles and unsaid sorrows. The truth is now being revealed after years of silence. From Robert Redford, the only person who experienced it, not from tabloids or tell-all novels. They were just two boys from different parts of America, leading quite different lives until they became Butch and Sundance. One followed the rules while the other broke them. Order and responsibility shaped one, while revolt and restlessness shaped the other. Even though their paths were never meant to cross, they were both going in the same direction. The story of Paul Newman started in the peaceful, cozy Shaker Heights, Ohio suburbs. He was born on January 26, 1925, and his father, Arthur Newman, was a co-owner of a prosperous sporting goods company. Paul had a creative flair from an early age and had a secure middle-class life. He performed as the court jester in a school production of Robin Hood when he was just 7 years old. His performance at the Cleveland Playhouse by the age of 10 was an obvious indication of the brilliance that was just waiting to be found. Because of his orderly and moral upbringing, his path appeared to be straightforward and unambiguous. Paul Newman's life, however, was irreversibly altered as the world went to war. He joined the U.S. Navy in 1943 with the intention of becoming a pilot. After being sent to Yale University's Navy V-12 program, a routine examination revealed a secret his renowned blue eyes had been concealing. He had color blindness. He had given up on his goal of flying. Rather, he received training as a torpedo bomber rear gunner and radio man. Just prior to the horrific War of Okinawa, his unit, Aviation Radio Man 3rd Newman, was posted to the aircraft carrier USS Bunker Hill while stationed in the Pacific. Then destiny intervened. The entire team was grounded when Newman's pilot got a serious ear infection on the day they were supposed to take off. Without them, the rest of their squadron flew to the carrier. The troops they had trained with were severely damaged when the USS Bunker Hill was struck by two kamikaze planes a few days later. An easy earage saved Paul Newman's life. The man he would become would be shaped by that near-death experience and that lucky moment for the rest of his life. Robert Redford was learning a separate set of lessons on the streets of California, while Newman was learning about fate and duty in the Navy. His early years were very different from the peaceful stability of Shaker Heights, as he was born in Santa Monica on August 18, 1936. The family relocated to Van, New York, which Redford subsequently referred to as a cultural mud sea. His father put in a lot of overtime as a milkman and then as an accountant. A restless child with freckles, he felt stuck in the monotony of suburban existence. He turned into a rebel to get away, stealing hubcaps for fun and scaling skyscrapers. But early on, his spirit of rebellion was put to the test. Redford had a slight attack of polio when he was 11 years old. He was bedridden for weeks, a period of forced immobility for a youngster who simply wanted to move. But it wasn't bad enough to place him in an iron lung. This early conflict only strengthened his eventual yearning for adventure and excitement. Because of his exceptional athletic ability, he was awarded a baseball scholarship to attend the University of Colorado. But he was followed by his rebellious nature. After he began drinking and skipping school, he was expelled from the team and forfeited his scholarship. Disillusioned and lost, he wandered around Europe in search of his calling as a painter before coming to New York to pursue acting, a career he had considered absurd. After a near-death experience, one guy returned to study drama on the GI Bill. The other was a self-described criminal who fell into acting after dropping out of college. They represented the two sides of the American coin, each shaped by a distinct fire. Their two worlds were going to meet in Hollywood. Paul Newman was more than just a cinematic star by 1968. He was a legendary figure. He was one of the most well-known people in the world because to movies like Cool Hand Luke and The Hustler. Conversely, Robert Redford was largely unknown. The romantic comedy Barefoot in the Park, in which he starred opposite Jane Fonda, is his greatest claim to fame. Although he worked as an actor, he was not a household name. A script titled Butch Cassidy in the Sundance Kid followed. After reading it, Redford realized right away that he was the ideal Sundance Kid. It evoked the restless spirit of an outlaw he had carried throughout his life. However, 20th Century Fox, the studio, had other ideas. Redford wasn't on their list of stars to play Sundance, and they needed a huge celebrity like Newman. George Roy Hill, the director, battled for him, but the studio refused to give in. Hill felt Redford was the one, but they made him meet with other well-known actors. Months passed while the impasse persisted. The studio made every effort to exclude Redford from the movie. Paul Newman was the only person still standing. He had the authority to select his co-star and to get the film produced. In New York, he met Redford at Newman's residence. Newman listened to the studio's worries before making a choice that would alter Redford's career and create a lifelong loyalty. He confronted the studio executives, stating that he preferred to collaborate with an actor rather than a mere celebrity. For a man he hardly knew, he risked his own reputation. Later, Redford would admit that he had no idea how many Hollywood individuals would have done it. The majority would have paid attention to the studio powers or their representatives. Newman, however, was unique. Redford was only cast in the movie because of his support. Redford never forgot that act of integrity. "I always felt like I owed Paul for that," he said. It was about respect for the craft, not about fame or money, and it became the foundation of their friendship. The studio finally gave in, but with one last requirement, they insisted on changing the title because Newman was the bigger star. And the original title was The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy, but they put Newman's character first to please the studio. Newman saw something in Redford that the studio didn't, a shared dedication to the work that went beyond the surface of Hollywood. It was a small price to pay, and a legendary partnership was born when the two men were finally brought together on screen. Their friendship took on a distinct rhythm on the set of Butch Cassidy, and later, The Sting. And when the cameras were rolling, they were the ultimate professionals. Both men had a background in theater and live television, and they both had a great respect for the art of acting. As Redford explained, they were fundamentally American actors, full of irreverence, fun, and a constant desire for one-upmanship. Newman was known for being highly engaged and enjoying a lot of rehearsal. They would spend hours delving into their characters, challenging each other to make every scene better, but a different dynamic took over the moment the director yelled "cut." The rules of their on-set relationship were as follows. Redford had to put up with all of Newman's godawful jokes, and Newman had to put up with Redford constantly arriving 10 to 15 minutes late. Newman even gave Redford a pillow embroidered with the words, "Punctuality is the courtesy of kings." Newman was hinting that his friend had lost his punctuality somewhere between their first and second movies. If you're viewed as an icon, you need a mechanism to take yourself down to keep the balance. They needed a way to remind themselves and each other that they were just two guys in a world that treated them like icons. And this playful rivalry was their way of staying grounded. They saw that mechanism as a long-running, epic prank war, and the most famous of these pranks centered on Newman's love of auto racing. After filming Butch Cassidy, Newman took a Porsche owned by Redford for a drive and fell in love with racing right away. He became very good at incredible reflexes, but he talked about it so much that it drove Redford insane. Redford chose to send a message for Newman's 50th birthday, so he went to a Connecticut junkyard, found a completely destroyed Porsche shell, had it wrapped in a ribbon as a gift, and brought it to Newman's porch with a note that read, "Happy 50th. Newman never mentioned it, and for weeks there was nothing but silence. Newman had gotten his retribution, but Redford wasn't finished. He had the block of metal taken to a friend who was a sculptor and commissioned a piece of art. Then one day, Redford returned home to his rented home to discover a huge, impossible-to-weight crate in the center of his living room, so heavy that it had dented the floorboards. Inside, the Porsche was crushed into a solid cube of molten metal. He called it an extremely unsightly sculpture, and then the joke was so flawless that any words would have spoiled it. and it was covertly put into the center of Paul Newman's immaculate garden. Until Newman's death, neither man ever mentioned the Porsche, the cube, or the sculpture to the other. The world witnessed the humor, the tricks, and the magic on screen, but a deeper, more solemn bond was developing between the two men based on a sort of parallel tragedy that few people were aware of. It was evidence of a friendship that, as Redford stated, didn't require many words. A young Robert Redford married Lola Van Wagen, a Utah college student, in 1958. They were just starting out, leading a quiet life away from the spotlight of Hollywood. When their first child, a son they named Scott Anthony Redford, was born in September 1959. Both men carried a private burden that would covertly define their lives. They both lost a son. Their happiness, however, was tragically short-lived, as their infant son passed away from sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, on November 17, 1959, just 2.5 months later. Redford and Lola were left to mourn an unfathomable loss long before he became the Sundance Kid, a devastating blow and a private heartbreak that they hardly ever discussed in public. Tragic events befell Paul Newman's family in a painfully similar manner nearly 20 years later. Newman's first marriage to Jackie Witt produced a son named Scott, who grew up under the enormous shadow of his renowned father and attempted to follow in his footsteps by becoming an actor. But he found it difficult to cope with the pressure of being Paul Newman's son. "Being his son is hell," he once remarked. "His blue eyes are not like mine, his talent is not mine. I am not as fortunate as he is. I have nothing at all. I am that." Scott Newman passed away on November 20, 1978, at the age of 28 after unintentionally consuming too much alcohol and narcotics. Paul Newman would live with a lifelong spiral of remorse as a result of the loss. In a posthumous memoir, he acknowledged his darkest regrets. "I kept thinking he was going through a phase of adolescent bad judgment," Newman remarked. "I never thought it would be fatal." He continuously questioned himself, wondering whether there was something he could have done. Was there any way I could have let him know he could simply be himself and that he didn't have to be like me or do manly things? He acknowledged the extent of the grief, saying, "I have knelt down numerous times and begged Scott's pardon." This unsaid suffering served as the covert catalyst for a common goal that would ultimately shape the latter part of their lives. Both Redford and Newman grew more and more devoted to a common belief as they aged. "If you are lucky enough to succeed, you should put something back," Redford said. This was more than just a good idea for both men. It served as a compass. They created legacies that would outlive any movie by using their wealth and popularity. They achieved this by battling for their independence. Paul Newman's journey of selflessness began in his own kitchen. He started putting his homemade salad dressing into bottles to give as presents to friends. It gained so much popularity that he and his friend A.E.H. Worm Hochner made the decision to transform it into Newman's own. Newman had vowed right from the start he would give all of the money to a good cause. By making this choice, he was able to finance the issues he was passionate about without any financial interference from Hollywood. Thousands of charities have received hundreds of millions of dollars from Newman's throughout the years. His personal suffering served as the impetus for his most intimate endeavor. He established the Hole in the Wall Gang Camp in 1988 so that children with life-threatening illnesses could get away from their therapies and just be children. Built in honor of a son he was unable to save, it was a place of pleasure and mischief. Hundreds of thousands of children and their families have benefited from the camp's expansion into the Serious Fun Children's Network, a global network of camps. Newman wasn't an actor portraying a hero in this piece. The truth is, he was a hero. Robert Redford was creating a legacy of art, while Newman was creating a legacy of philanthropy. He felt that the Hollywood studio system suppressed creativity and disregarded original voices, and he had grown weary of it. Thus, he established the Sundance Institute in Utah in 1980. His objective was to establish an environment free from studio influence where independent filmmakers could grow their careers and advance their projects. This endeavor led to the creation of the Sundance Film Festival, which has grown to be the world's most significant independent film festival, launching the careers of many filmmakers and authors. Redford established artistic independence for a new generation of storytellers, much like Newman established financial independence with his generosity. They were engaged in parallel conflicts, empowering others with their victories, and they helped each other through it all. They supported one another monetarily and attended each other's festivities. It was a low-key collaboration based on a mutual recognition that their real mission went much beyond the cinema screen. Fans begged for a third movie for years. Why did the finest partnership in Hollywood never work together again after The Sting? In actuality, it wasn't because I didn't try. Redford, Newman, and director George Roy Hill continuously searched for another story they could work on together for over 13 years. However, the standard had been set too high. They refused to make a third movie just for financial or nostalgic reasons, since they knew they had already captured lightning in a bottle twice. They were unable to locate a story that was unique enough to honor Butch Cassidy and the Sting's history. Only once did they come near. The rights to Bill Bryson's book, A Walk in the Woods, which tells the tale of two elderly friends who reunite while hiking the Appalachian Trail, were purchased by Redford in the late 1990s. A calm, character-driven tale for two elderly icons seemed ideal. The health of his old friend was deteriorating by the time Redford presented the concept to Newman. Newman sadly declined the position because he believed he was too old and physically unfit to perform the duties of the position. Before retirement, he would only make one more live-action appearance in the movie Road to Perdition. The chance was lost forever. Redford visited Newman at his Connecticut home during the latter months of his life as he fought cancer. Both Newman and him were aware of the situation. They didn't discuss the imminence of the end. Grand speeches and sad farewells were unnecessary. Instead, they sat and discussed their thoughts, politics, the impending election, and the world's pressing issues. Until the very end, their friendship remained genuine and present. At the age of 83, Paul Newman died on September 26, 2008. The loss of a legend was lamented by the entire world. Everybody sent in tributes. However, his oldest friend made the most significant point. It was brief, straightforward, and effective. Ultimately, what Robert Redford ultimately said wasn't a dark Hollywood secret or a hidden feud. There is a point where feelings go beyond words. I have lost a real friend. My life and this country is better for his being in it. It was the quiet tale of a fraternity that had been built on devotion, put to the test by celebrity, and strengthened by a pain that only they could comprehend for half a century. Redford saw a brother while the rest of the world saw two movie stars. And in a world of ephemeral fame, their really enduring legacy lay not just in the classic movies they produced, but also in their uncommon and genuine relationship.